Hey guys, it's God Bars here, the self-proclaimed hip-hop historian, and this is the 100th episode of my series where I grab a vinyl from my collection, talk about why I love it, what influence it had, and what its place is in the grand scheme of hip-hop. I went back and forth on which album to do in this spot, but I ultimately settled on the monumental sophomore effort by easily one of the best rappers alive with no debate, Nas. I've been a bit torn on albums like Nas's second LP here, because the only real reason I haven't done albums like Machiavelli, Seven Day Theory, Don Illuminati, or Ice Cube's Death Certificate, or Life After Death is because I discussed all of those artists in my last 90s group. However, there's a number of acts that I've had on here more than once at this point, like Doom or Hove, and while I've definitely made an effort to at least do projects from separate decades, it didn't make much sense to me to discuss God's Son or the Lost Tapes before doing It Was Written. The sort of double-edged sword that comes with having a debut as massive and impactful as Illmatic is you end up getting a bunch of discount hip-hop fans who post lists of the 10 best albums in the genre, but you can tell when they're just trying to be diplomatic and aren't actually familiar with any of the classics they're referencing. This isn't some gatekeeping thing either, it's the opposite, as my annoyance strictly comes from a lack of listening to hip hop. None of these criticisms ever come from a place of, oh, I know more about this genre than you need to stick to yours. It comes from wanting people who have conversations about the best rapper to be somewhat versed in hip hop, which, as I always say, shouldn't be a chore to anyone who loves the genre, and if it feels like one to you, maybe you aren't as big a fan as you thought you were. This has made it so many of these lists are transparent, to me at least, because they always just throw the one most beloved and highly rated album from each artist, which leads to the average list passing over albums like It Was Written, similar to how I feel like certain Kendrick fans kind of hide behind the reverence for To Pimp a Butterfly, where they always say it's the best album of all time with no debate, yet they know they haven't even heard Section 80, let alone anything before that. When it comes down to the people who actually are familiar with Nasir's dense discography, I think a good amount are torn between his first and second album, and I can definitely understand that position. When it comes to sheer impact and influence, practically nothing can touch Illmatic, but don't let that trick you into thinking LPs like It Was Written weren't insanely important and popular. Tracks like If I Ruled the World place among the most successful hits in his career, and the killer posse cut with The Firm showed Nas wasn't about to play it safe and go for a commercial sound out of fear of the infamous second album slump. Instead, he took the 2 years in between his first and second release, honing his pen and pushing the rugged boom bap style he helped popularize even further. It's kind of like 2001, where obviously Nas didn't have as long a break as Dre. To be honest, to my knowledge, he never really took much of a break at any point in his career. But both showed their successful debuts weren't flukes, with numerous classic beats, verses, and skits, especially on It Was Written. Nas was already one of the best lyricists in the game by a pretty wide margin, but the concepts he executes here made him unrivaled as the top writer in 1996. Even some of my all-time favorites like Kool Keith or Ghostface, who both released classics that same year that I've already talked about on this channel. While both would probably rank higher on my personal list of favorite MCs, I'd still maintain that Nas was the denser, more poetic writer at the time. He's just rapping at a level virtually nobody was, all across this thing, but what really puts it ahead of the curve, next to the stellar production, is the forward-thinking, groundbreaking track I Gave You Power. This wasn't the first or last song Nas would do with a direct concept behind it. You could even argue he'd get more out of the box with his ideas the further into his career he got. I'm sure there's others, and if you can think of any, please leave them down below, but the only rap song prior to Nas that took a similar risk to this one is I Can't Wake Up off of KRS's first solo album, where he describes being a blunt who's getting passed around to all these various hip hop figures as he pleads to wake up from the nightmare. The debut did have a pretty dope story, with One Love being a letter he had written to his mans on Rikers Island, updating him on the state of the outside world, but what's special about tracks like I Gave You Power is the presentation is just as important as the idea, which is why he's always executed them so flawlessly. In this case, Nas writes a song from the perspective of a gun, which by itself is already insanely creative and refreshing, but he delivers it through poetic imagery, like detailing how he purposefully doesn't let himself be fired at the end to break his curse of being invented to cause pain, but then it finishes off with him being picked up by someone else, continuing the cycle. Really, the only reason this isn't my favorite Nas song with a direct concept is because 2001's Stillmatic featured the song Rewind, where he tells an entire story backwards, which never ceases to blow my mind. But while the hard-hitting story on I Gave You Power helps the other tracks in their quest to deliver food for thought through quality rhymes, he also gives It Was Written another dimension by bringing in a variety of topics, from the witness stories of crime and poverty that he broke out with on Illmatic, to the progressive track that takes a stance as anti-East Coast, West Coast beef while it was still going on. There's even a track about lost black women and the power they possess, and Nas always proved with his delicate handling of these issues that it wasn't ever just virtue signaling for good PR. The song about deading the deadly beef between the two coasts fittingly has a guest verse by Dr. Dre, who, as you might expect, produced the track as well. The features and producers recruited for this thing besides him don't disappoint, and with how flawless the track list on Nas's debut was, that was no easy task. On the featured artist side, besides Dre, as I referenced earlier, we get appearances from all the members of the firm, which were AZ, Cormega, and Foxy Brown, and the rest of them include JoJo Haley, Lauryn Hill, and both Havoc and Prodigy of Mobb Deep. For the beats, again aside from Dre, he had assistance from top-tier names like Premier, Havoc, Rashad Smith, Live Squad, Trackmasters, and LES. For my top 3 favorite tracks, I'm gonna leave out I Gave You Power because it'd get a bit redundant at this point, and instead I'm gonna go with The Message, Affirmative Actions, and Shootouts. For honorable mentions, I want to shout out Street Dreams, Take It in Blood, Nas Is Coming, The Setup, Suspect, and If I Ruled the World, Imagine That. Thank you for watching my 100th video. Next time we're going to break into the triple digits with one of the most enigmatic rappers to ever come out of the West Coast. So tune in for that, and if you enjoyed, be sure to like, subscribe, and let me know what your favorite songs are off this powerhouse of a sophomore album. Don't forget to have a great day, and I'll see you next time, okay? Alright.
Me to bring rap justice, but I ain't 5